Yes, thank you. Like I said, I am not here to tell you what you should think about the case. Isn't that the problem with the Katie Courics and Martha Raditzes of the world? Spoon feeding and ramming down your throats the narratives that they believe that you should swallow. How to think, what's important to them and their filter. And it's really just asking the questions that so much of the local, state, and national media won't dare to ask. I think part of it is, it's this toxic combination of political correctness run amok, right? In some cases, just sheer laziness, and this elitist attitude that people who inhabit the fourth estate are there for their own self-aggrandizement and enrichment at the expense of the truth. So this is an incredible opportunity. I'm so honored to have Jenny Holtzclaw, Daniel's sister, who's been his greatest advocate, and Brian Bates, who was part of the original defense team as a private investigator, but who has now volunteered of his own time to help spread the message about the truth. So they're here. This is a very unique opportunity to ask them any questions that you might have. This is very different than what'd you think of those police detectives? Well, I mean, Hollywood could not invent these people. And this is something that the people in Oklahoma have not been exposed to, because so many of those journalists are so much more interested in preserving access to the elites than in challenging them in any way. So let's open this up for questions. I want you to get as many questions as you have about the case. And then, of course, later on, if you want to ask me, about anything else, you're welcome to do that as well. Where are we going to start?
We have a mic right over here if anybody wants to line up, or I'm happy to try to hustle around to you as well. So, first question.
Where are we? All right.
I'm just curious about the status of the case. Is there an appeal in process or plans for an appeal?
Yeah, we're appealing right now. So the deadline, we're on our 4th extension. So there's been things that have came up, such as that male DNA. So we've had to ask for multiple extensions. So our turn-in date is February 1st. And then from there, the state will actually get a rebuttal that argument that we are, and then it goes to the state of Oklahoma Criminal Appeals, Board of Criminal Appeals. So, but right now he is incarcerated, he is in prison, and I talk to him every day, and so right now we're just praying that we win the first appeal, but sometimes it can be several years before an appeal gets, conviction gets overturned.
And they have a public defender right now who's in charge of the case. They can't afford a private appellate lawyer at this point. So the public defender has, how many cases on his plate right now? Probably. Right.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I was a member of the original defense team, and it was a team that took this on. We knew when we first got this case that it would be a very difficult case to win. I'm a private investigator. I work on a lot of individual criminal cases. I was actually brought in because the lawyer, Scott Adams, that was working for Daniel, had enough foresight to see to bring some people in with some opposing views. And Daniel and I are the unlikeliest of allies that you could imagine. I've been critical of police over the years in my work, and when I first got involved in it, it was trying to find out, where the problems where this case were. And it took a team to get us to that point. And so some people will say, well, then you must have screwed up. He's in prison, 263 years, you were part of the team. And one thing that should really disturb people, and it gets to it in the second half of this, and shows you how slated and how dangerous mob justice can be, and how dangerous groups like Black Lives Matter can be. Daniel received 263 years, but the standout, you can summarize all of it in the one accuser that he received the most number of years from. He received 62 years from one accuser alone. That accuser swore under oath that her attacker was a man that she knew well because he patrols her neighborhood all the time, and he is a short, black man. She's 5'11". Daniel is 6'2", very pale. Not only did she swear that her attacker was a short black man, she couldn't pick out her attacker in the courtroom. Even if you don't know who your attacker is, you know who the defendant is in the courtroom. He's the only guy sitting over at the table, sweating his ass off because he's facing a jury. Beyond that, she swore that Daniel Holtzclaw took her to an abandoned schoolyard. The media always calls it the abandoned schoolyard. It's a public park that used to have a school on it. But it sounds better to say the abandoned schoolyard. That he took her there, that he stopped his car, that he removed her from the car, that he bent her over, and that he raped her for 10 minutes. Sounds atrocious. The only thing is his car is equipped with AVL, or GPS, automatic vehicle locator. That GPS clearly said he drove past the park. He never drove slower than 2 miles an hour. He was only in the area for just over about a minute and a half to 2 minutes. So he never stopped. He was never there for 10 minutes. It never happened. He's not a short black man. That equated to 62 years. Why? Because for a month, the courtroom was packed by literally people like the Black Panthers wearing their berets, and when the court ordered them to remove their berets, they refused because they said it was religious headdress. That's what we were facing. It was a joke, but I want us to make sure we get some other questions, but I want to make sure if you leave here with anything tonight, you leave here knowing that that is a fact that cannot be disputed by anybody, and there isn't a defense team out there that can present a defense when a jury is willing to convict on that testimony.
And just one addendum, on the other side of this, the vast majority of accusers who are now suing in high-dollar lawsuits, including 5 women whose charges were completely rejected by the jury, are represented by a man named Benjamin Crump. That may sound familiar to you. He's the Al Sharpton in training. Remember Al Sharpton and the fake hoax crime with Tawana Brawley? Well, this guy is the guy who represented Trayvon Martin's family and Michael Brown's family. All right, go ahead.
I don't know how to make the GoFundMe site, but this sets up just perfect. And I got $100 in my pocket right now that I'd like to donate, and you ought to make that a part of everything that you do with this program to get a fund going to get him proper representation and get him out of jail.
Thank you. GoFundMe actually shut me down within a week of it being up. CNN did an article.
Did you all hear what she said?
There are other sites.
GoFundMe shut me down. You can Google, CNN did a report, a whole article on it. But they shut me down within 1 week. I emailed them, and then they emailed me back, and they said they got too many complaints. Too many people called them, and they shut me down. So right now I have 2 websites going, freedanielholtzclaw.com, and then also justiceforDanielHoltzclaw.com. And both those have PayPal donation buttons that I use now instead of giving the money to GoFundMe, because there's a certain percentage that gets taken out for each donation.
As a follow-up, what's preventing him from getting out during the appeal process?
Law, I believe it's just...
He's been formally sentenced. They gave him the judge, who really the circus, the courtroom was a circus. I sit through hundreds of trials. This was a judge that was fairly new to the bench. You got to remember, it's an elected position. So you don't get very many activist judges at that level because they want to keep their job. It's a pretty cushy $100,000 a year job. There were literally people in the audience. 7 people were stopped during trial because they were taking pictures of the jurors. There's only one reason that you take pictures of jurors, to intimidate them, because if they don't come back with the sentence that you want, they're going to release your picture to the public, and you're going to have to deal with that safety issue at home. One of the people who was confronted by law enforcement for taking pictures of jurors was one of the accusers themselves. A woman I'm not afraid to name, Shadarion Hill, was caught taking pictures of accusers. She was a woman that had 6 charges against Daniel, all 6 not guilty. That's what we're up against. 263 years, the rest of his life. The appeal process alone means he will be locked up for at least a few years before they even bother to look at the appeal on the first round.
And so, I guess said there was, how many accusers? 13? Is that correct? Over 13?
There were actually more than 13.
Right.
Right, Brian? You want to explain that?
This is something else, and again, they touched on this a little bit. There's so many, you could talk about this for weeks. It's an infuriating case. It took thousands of man hours to sort this out. 13 accusers are what made it to trial. 13. There were actually 21 accusers. 21 accusers, 8 of them were dismissed immediately because their allegations were so outlandish that even prosecutors who would forward the accuser who said he was a short black man, but said, but we can't believe these people. Primarily because they claimed that they were raped by Daniel Holtzclaw after he'd been put on administrative leave, no longer had a gun, no longer had a badge, no longer had a vehicle, and virtually all of them, including the man, admitted, okay, I lied. I was trying to get on the gravy train. So that's 7. No, it was 8. Then we had 5 more that were eliminated through the jury process, found not guilty. That's 13 alone right there. Only 8 of them was he found guilty of. That means 60% of all accusers were found to be liars and opportunists. And the man is sitting in prison, and those people are sitting free, and they only charged one of those accusers with making a false police report because she simply refused to admit that she made a false police report. The others admitted right up, okay, I lied. They should have been charged. They admitted to it. If I admit to a crime, I'm being charged. They weren't. She continued to try to dig in, and at the last minute she said, okay, I lied. So they charged her. She got probation, and she can take it off her record in a year. This man is sitting in prison, and she tried to send him to prison too.
And what was the makeup of the jury? Just a quick question, being that, I mean, obviously Black Lives Matter clearly was raising havoc in the courtroom. What was the actual makeup of the jury?
It was an all-white jury. It was an all-white jury. It was a mostly male jury. They tried to make a huge deal out of the fact. As a matter of fact, the prosecutors got up and said how disappointed that they were that it wasn't a more racially diverse jury. For one, it was Daniel's peers that were there. Unfortunately, they were intimidated by the people that were in the audience, but there's something the prosecutors never bothered to admit, and I sit in that courtroom all the time. Every single time they have a black defendant that they're trying to convict, they make sure they eliminate every black juror that they can possibly do. So that's what we were up against. But when we were up against a jury who admitted that they were most influenced by the fact that they knew that there could be riots, and then Miss Grace Franklin in the series talks about they were prepared to riot, and they weren't going to riot in their own neighborhoods, and they knew they wouldn't be allowed to go to the white neighborhood, so they were going to do it right then and there.
It's chilling when you think that this could happen to a member of law enforcement if a prosecutor's office and these bumbling sex crimes detectives could manufacture a case like this against a young, idealistic law enforcement officer who was sworn to serve and protect the son of 2 police officers. It could happen to anybody. This is not some parochial case. And you will really, really want to watch the second episode because we go into detail and break down some of these accusers' stories. It is beyond surreal, this rabbit hole that Jenny's brother was forced down. And that's what's especially scary. This was a witch hunt fueled by the social justice mob. And there are feckless politicians in both parties that are looking the other way. Go ahead.
What would you have to say to teens, as like me, that are only shown one side of the story on social media?
The same thing that Daniel has always wanted. He's always wanted everyone to do their own research. You know, it has been completely one-sided ever since inside trial. the same local media sat in right in the same courtroom, but they refused to report anything that proved Daniel's innocence. And so you only hear the one headliners. So a lot of people have said, he's guilty, he's guilty. You see DNA. But then when you look actually closer, read into it, Brian Bates put a website together, Holtzclawtrial.com. He gives detailed information about the case. We put it all out there for people to read for themselves instead of the one headliners that you see, across media, social media, all those articles that are being shared. So right now we've gone and built websites to put information out there so people can read for themselves what media is not providing you guys. So it has been completely one-sided from the very beginning.
I have to share with you the response from the police brass in Oklahoma City. I spent an hour with those detectives, and I am planning on releasing at some point the full video because we're all about transparency. And the flack for the Oklahoma City Police Department, who's used to the local reporters bowing and scraping to them, because again, it's about access trading, not about truth telling, accused me of being quote unquote too aggressive. Right? It's not the tone, it's not the volume of the questions that these people are bothered by. It's the questions. They're not used to being challenged by independent thinkers instead of lemmings. What a squandering of the privilege of making a living off of the First Amendment. That's why I'm so re-energized to do what we're doing with this new platform. And it really is going to take each and every one of you making a decision about how you consume news and information going forward. I mean, you're forced to pay for PBS. I mean, you work hard to earn your money, and everyone has limited resources and attention. We're committed to continue covering this story until Daniel Holtzclaw is free. Next question.
I'm impressed at how cool and collected you were talking to these detectives.
Thank you. I thought I reined it in.
Yeah, you asked wonderful questions, but you stayed cool and collected, and I don't think I could have done the same. When you were poking holes in all their evidence, and I'm impressed.
And letting them hang themselves, really?
Exactly, with the lack of evidence, and what you were saying about the riots and the jury was afraid of that. I'd like to know how you do that, my first question. Secondly, is what can you offer to the rest of us out here to get this message out and to help with the platform and to help free Daniel and work towards justice, which is what is exactly needed in this case?
Yes, real justice as opposed to social justice.
Amen.
Right?
Amen.
I think using social media, so much of which is dominated by progressive leftists. I mean, look at Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook. Okay, he admonished his own employees for protesting a Black Lives Matter banner that was put on the office headquarters. Somebody had scratched it out and put All Lives Matter, and he wagged his finger at them and told them not to do that anymore. But we still have access to those platforms. Jenny uses Facebook so effectively to keep people updated. What's your Facebook page?
Jenny Holtzclaw is where you can find me from. And then also there's free in defense of Daniel Holtzclaw as well. And then there's also free Daniel Holtzclaw that you can find those different pages too. And if you go to freedanielholtzclaw.com, I link those Facebook pages to that website as well. So you can link to each one.
There's also a petition to Oklahoma Governor Mary Fallin, a good and loyal Republican who has, until now, said and done nothing about this case, a petition to her for clemency. You know, unfortunately, we do have an administration coming in that is going to be a sea change, right, with Donald Trump on the attitude about law enforcement officers. And one of Donald Trump's first gestures is actually to reach out to a widow of a police officer who had been ambushed just a week after the election. Unfortunately, in this case, I mean, this is not a federal crime. It's a state level crime, so it's really at the state level, and you know, your neighbors in Oklahoma obviously need help because they seem to not understand the gravity of this miscarriage of justice. And then, of course, following Brian on his side is also especially important because he has been at the forefront of, I think, showing up all of the media in Oklahoma. He's doing a better job of journalism than all of these people who wear that label.
You know, I honestly can't stress enough the importance of, I guess, media outlets, if you want to call it, like CRTV. And I'll give an example. And I was probably someone who would have been very skeptical 5 years ago. But to get to this point, 1 year later, many baby steps had to occur, and then one big leap when Michelle Malkin did her story. And I'll give you a couple of examples. There's a publication, SB Nation, and they cover sports. And if you're into sports, you know who SB Nation is. They're huge, millions and millions of readers. They didn't even ask the question, what if Daniel Holtzclaw isn't guilty? They simply wrote a long-form biography on him. They never questioned his guilt. They simply gave his biography, where he came from, his life, those sorts of things. You could have taken away from it that, wow, even the good kid can go wrong and screw up. They never questioned his guilt. There was such a backlash from the social justice mob, they immediately retracted the article, they fired staff members, and they issued a public apology for simply giving a biography. Our local newspaper, the Oklahoman, spent 4 to 5 hours in my office doing the exact same thing that Michelle did, going through all of the discovery, every bit of it. They did a 4-part series in the newspaper, never mentioned a single concern that Michelle brought up, ever, never mentioned it. And they came to me asking specific questions. Believe it or not, they had heard that there was a report where a photo lineup was presented for Kim Davis to show Janie Liggins to pick out Daniel Holtzclaw because her description of him was so completely off. In the report, an officer's doing a little cover his own, says, I presented it to Detective Davis. She looked at it and said, I don't want to show this to Janie. I'm not sure she'll be able to pick Daniel out. Only one person, only one accuser was ever shown a photo lineup, Terry Morris. She could not pick Daniel out of that photo lineup. They never showed another accuser a photo lineup. They were so afraid that they would go up against that and have to repeat over and over again, yeah, our person couldn't pick this person out.
You have a follow-up?
Yeah, I just
Yes.
have a follow-up question. I realize that you have the 2 websites, and you do as well, and that's wonderful. But I want to know, you got everybody energized to get involved with this case. You even suggested signing the petition. That's wonderful, but I want to make sure that we don't walk out of here, put it in the back of our minds, and go on with our daily business. We're all so busy. So I want you to give me an idea of what each and every one of us can do when we walk out that door to make a difference in your brother's life and in this case.
Okay, I actually brought it there in my purse, but I brought cards, and it actually has the Holtzclaw trial website, and you can take those with you guys. I brought a lot, so you guys can bring it to your friends, spread the word that way.
Phone calls?
Phone calls, yeah, phone calls.
Constantly calling them and laying some heat on them?
Yeah.
Okay.
If you want phone calls, you can write the governor, Oklahoma governor, ask, for her to look into this case. There's the attorney general that you can contact as well, the lieutenant governor that we have too. And then also the petition.
Well, God bless you, and I'm sorry for your pain.
I have a couple of other suggestions. If you pray, pray. There's a reason why we titled this series Daniel in the Den. I don't have to explain it to those of you who are nodding your heads. He was thrown into a lion's den. He's behind bars now. There was a network that is dedicated to African American programming called TV1 that plied its own narratives about this case. Some of you who are especially engaged and informed might recognize the name of this network, because that network employs a man named Roland Martin, who you often see on CNN. And he was exposed this past election cycle as the man who leaked debate questions during the town hall debate during the Democratic primary to Donna Brazile, the CNN contributor, who passed herself off as some sort of respectable journalist / commentator. Roland Martin leaked those questions to Donna Brazile, who leaked them to Hillary Clinton. That network covered the Daniel Holtzclaw story. Can you guess how they framed the story? Not only was the framing incorrect and the reporting incomplete, there were actual falsehoods spread. And I want to turn over the microphone to Brian Bates because he dissected that program, and it is appalling. Guess what? While the police department complained about my aggressive questions, they've been absolutely silent. Total radio silent about all of these mischaracterizations and falsehoods.
The TV1 series is one of these, the most frustrating thing about it is so many people watch it and they think they just watched a documentary. And it's maddening. They literally reenact. When I went to give a critique of it, it took me days because I had to end up transcribing the entire show. They had a legal analyst, an actual attorney, that appeared and was identified as a legal analyst that inserted what she said were quotes from Daniel Holtzclaw that exist nowhere. But you know what they did? They forwarded the narrative of that network. The legal analyst literally says in one of the opening scenes, and as Janie Liggins was heading back to her car, Daniel stopped her and he looked her in the eye and he told her, if you tell anybody, nobody will believe you. That doesn't exist anywhere. It's not even an allegation from Janie Liggins herself, but they inserted it. They glossed over the short black man, never mentioned that one of them did that. They never mentioned nobody could pick him out of a photo lineup. What this goes back to, someone else asked, what can you do when you leave here today? The best thing that you can do is be an informed and educated public. That's the best thing that you can do, because I guarantee you, virtually everyone who talks about this case, who criticizes this case, who thinks that justice was served, cannot name 5 true facts from that case. But they can name every narrative that's been told out there right now. One of the ways you can educate yourself is by watching the second half of that series. Is going on. I was interviewed for it. I knew it. I signed up. I paid the money. I watch it. I've got it saved on my phone. Watch it while I was on the way down here on the plane. Educate yourself. One of the things I loved about, I have to admit, I'm a little ashamed to admit it, when Michelle called me, I didn't know who she was. I'm sorry. And I did the one thing OCPD obviously could have done. I Googled her name. And I called Jenny and I said, wow. I said, as long as we're on her side and she agrees with us, we're okay. If we're not, we could have problems. OCPD, they could do the same thing. Google it and go, okay, this is what we're up against. You have to educate yourselves. And one of the ways to do that is this program. When Michelle called me, she said, hey, you're a great advocate for Daniel. I'll give you that. But I don't know what the whole story is. I've interviewed lots of people, and they always tell me it's like selling a car. You hear all the great things about the car. You don't hear any of the bad things. She immediately flew into Oklahoma City. She sat on my back porch. We talked for hours about the case. She said the same thing. Great advocate for Daniel. I'm interested in the story, but I have conditions, and these are the conditions. I get 100% of all of the discovery. I get everything, and I had boxes of it. We put it on a huge hard drive. She said, I get everything, and you have to swear you are holding nothing back, and you have to be willing to answer every single question I pose, because I am putting my reputation, I'm putting my network's reputation, and I am putting lots and lots of money on the line for this. But I'll start looking into it. OCPD didn't do that. They wouldn't provide hardly anything. As you would see in the second part of the series, they had a handler that wouldn't let certain questions be asked or answered. We didn't put those restrictions because we're transparent. People will point to Michelle Malkin and CRTV and what they're doing and go, oh, that's bias. Don't pay attention to that, that's bias. And I would agree, it is bias, and sometimes the truth is bias, but it's transparent bias. They tell you up front what they believe. You know what's a dangerous bias? When the newspaper sits in my office for 5 hours, sees all the facts, doesn't report any of the concerns, and wants the public to think those concerns must not exist because they never mentioned them, and they never mentioned their bias. That's a dangerous bias. Educate yourself, watch the show, find out what facts are out there, and then tell everybody you know.
Next question.
First of all, I just want to say I have family that's in law enforcement and with similar backgrounds, and it's very disturbing to see this because I didn't know about this case, and I want to help too to try to educate people, you know, about Daniel's tragedy here, and hopefully we can do something to help you. And it's just very disturbing to me. But also, I just want to find out too, is will this come, once it's appealed, will it be able to go to a higher court and somewhere out of Oklahoma City? Because I don't think his best interests are there. So is that possible to get it moved? I don't know much about the law, but can that be moved out of Oklahoma City?
Yeah, eventually, if the first one doesn't get approved at the Oklahoma level, it does go up to the federal and then Supreme. I'm not exactly sure how many appeals in between, or if it just goes to the next one, but we would hope to move it out of Oklahoma City area. I don't know about out of state. I'm not sure what the laws yet with that. So right now we're just gonna wait till we get the first appeal and hopefully win that one, so we don't have to wait to go to federal or Supreme. The average year for a wrongful conviction to overturn it is usually between 11 and 15 years. So before it even hits the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals, we're already looking at 2018, possibly 2019. So it's going to be a long road for us.
Well, I will pray, and I'm sure everyone in this room feels the same way.
There's also a way, Daniel has been so open and accessible. He does have access to a phone, and so I have been able to talk to him several times over the last several months. I talked to him on Thanksgiving, and you can write to him. And do you want to let people know how they can do that so you can communicate with him directly?
You'll just have to follow me on Facebook because I have the address on there. You guys probably don't have a pen and paper anyways, but just follow me on Facebook and I have the address that you guys can write him, and he responds back to you guys as well. He's very thankful that the letters and birthday cards, December 10th was his 30th birthday just a few days ago. And so he received a lot of birthday cards, Christmas cards, letters is what encourages him, because he knows people are out there fighting for him. So if you guys have any words of encouragement to send to him, he appreciates it.
You know, the left has been always so adept and skillful at telling stories and narratives. And so many of the narratives they tell are fake ones. Barack Obama telling this phony story about his mom not being able to get health insurance, and that being the foundation for the push for Obamacare, which of course killed so many of our health insurance plans, right? All of the stories that they tell. Well, I think that, to me, that's why it was so important to present the human face of Daniel Holtzclaw. Because if you do a cursory Google search, he appears as this monster. And in fact, in the second episode, you'll hear the police detectives with their amateur psychological diagnosis that they never verified with any actual clinical experts. They just had this gut feeling, this sense. Right? Brian had a wonderful description of their Barney Fife policing. And, you know, as we sit here, I mean, it is surreal. It's like a movie, and it's hilarious, except for the fact that Daniel is behind bars. He was convicted on his birthday. And the Black Lives Matter and social justice mob stood outside the courtroom taunting, mocking him, singing happy birthday. That's barbaric. And that's the face that we show on the show that nobody else will. Next question. Okay, fantastic. Let's try and get as many of you as possible.
My dad and I are both subscribers, Michelle, so I can't wait to see this. But,
thank you so much.
I wanted to ask, were you able to interview any of the jurors, or has anyone interviewed? Because the movie Al Capone movie comes to mind. This is obvious to me from just hearing this much that this no jury would have ever convicted him if there wasn't intimidation. And have any of these jurors been interviewed or admitted to such that it could be declared a mistrial?
It's a fantastic question. Before CRTV headed out to Enid for the screening on Saturday, the one-year anniversary of the verdict, I personally reached out to a couple of the jurors who had become public. They had granted interviews to other media outlets, and one of them tersely told me when I extended an invitation to him to view our episodes and consider the possibility that he might have done something very gravely wrong, wrote back, quote, "No thanks." I believe that this is really the next level of our investigation, is to try and find one of these people who will talk. We're hoping that the social media push, the exposure will somehow pierce the conscience of one of these 12 people. And I'm going to turn it over to Brian for comment.
Real quick, because I want to make sure the rest of you have a chance to answer a question. Give you some insight to the jury process. One thing we know for sure, immediately when the jurors went back to deliberation, within 45 minutes to an hour, they sent a note to the judge. The note to the judge read, "We need a bigger room to deliberate in. We feel like the walls are closing in on us." They were in a room that deliberations have gone on for decades and decades. There's only one reason you feel like the walls are closing in on you. It was becoming a very heated debate very, very quickly. Unfortunately, where did they move them? They moved them to the main courtroom, which is the biggest room they could go to. But also, unfortunately, the judge allowed, just on the other side of the courtroom door, literally feet from where they're deliberating, Black Lives Matter groups were able to do audible prayer circles where they were loudly praying for the victims of Daniel Holtzclaw, and all the jurors could hear it. Jurors were interviewed by the media after this was over. They admitted they were fearful of rioting in the streets. Another juror went public to talk about how they asked him, "Did you feel comfortable with your decision sending this man away for life?" And he said, "Wasn't sure at first, but after we gave our verdict, we were pulled back into judges' chambers, and the judge and the prosecutor told us about additional evidence they didn't even bother to use against Daniel. That made all of us feel confident." That raised my ears, and it raised the attorney's ears, because we didn't think that really happened. We filed for a motion immediately to have the verdict tossed. They had to call that juror back in front of the judge, and he admitted that he lied. There's only one reason you go on television and you lie to support your opinion. It's because you don't believe in your opinion.
Next question.
Yeah, I just wanted to see how Daniel's doing, how he's holding up, and how your parents are holding up as well.
Daniel's doing good. He has a lot of hope, and with this, luckily with Michelle bringing light, true facts of the case out to the public, Daniel is beyond ecstatic. We had a sold-out screening in Enid on December 10th on his birthday. He was really happy. There were people that believed, in Daniel's innocence. There were people that were on the fence. There were people that walked in that door believing he was guilty. But every single one of them left feeling there was a wrongful conviction on Daniel. And he's holding up good. I mean, has a lot of faith. My parents are still doing good. We're all just believing that something big is going to come out of this, and we're hoping that more people stand up and join this journey with us while we fight for Daniel and his freedom.
Next question.
Ma'am, question. It looks like you're doing the appeal completely on your own. Has the police union supported you in any way?
This was an interesting aspect. Daniel paid dues to the FOP. The FOP should have been there for him. The chief of police should have been there for him. Literally, within weeks of the allegations coming forward, Janie Liggins was pulled over. She claimed she was sexually assaulted. She immediately went to the news 3 days later and appeared on the news to profess what had happened to her, which is when the parade of accusers started coming forward to the police when they were approached. But what we ran into, sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a second. I start going off. The FOP, there we go. I was going off on Chief City. You get me started on him. Chief City first issued a letter within weeks of the allegations and said it was and you'll see it in the second part, it talked about it was the worst police corruption, worst actions he'd seen by a police officer in his 37 years, and yet he had received none of the evidence yet. This was literally only weeks after the initial allegation. There was no discovery evidence present, but what he had received were some reports from Detective Gregory. And as you would see in the second half of this, what Detective Gregory wrote in his reports and what were contained in the actual audio and videotaped interviews couldn't have been more different. In one case, you had an accuser that 7 times said, "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not a victim of any police officer." What's that? You're a victim? Wrote down in the opening paragraph that she was a victim, and Michelle does an excellent job going through the interview and counts off 7 times that she says, "I'm not a victim." And then at one point, Rocky Gregory goes, "This is a bad dude. This is a really bad dude. He's doing lots of bad things." And she goes, "You mean like getting women to do stuff so maybe they won't get arrested?" There you go. There you go. And she says, "Okay, now I got it. Now I got it." That's not me editorializing. It's on tape. And you see it in the second half. FOP did the exact same thing. Immediately threw Daniel under the bus. They had absolutely no evidence. They're not an investigative body. Said, "We're not going to represent you. We don't care that you've paid dues." That sent a clear message to every other police officer that the FOP and the chief does not believe until innocent, until proven guilty. It simply doesn't exist when you're trying to appease the social justice mob. Why? Because it's self-serving. Because when you throw Daniel under the bus and you stand up and you say, "Look at us. We're not afraid to out one of our own. We're on your side," there's no protests in front of the police department. There's no calls for the chief to be fired. And there's no people confronting police officers on the streets. All they had to do was very simple. Just sacrifice one innocent person.
It's horrifying because there is no safe space from this kind of corruption. To be convicted in the court of public opinion before you've even had a second in the court of law. Is that our last question? All right. Thank you so much for your time and your attention. We appreciate it so much. Thank you, Michael.
Well, Michelle has a very early flight. Are you going to do a few pictures? Are you okay? Okay.
I'll sign your palm card.
So what we want to do is we want to make sure everybody gets a photo. So I know everybody has a great Michelle Malkin story, but if you would, take your photo and step, and then when we're done, if we have time, she'll be able to talk to you, because I want to make sure that everybody here gets a chance to get their photo with her, so please be respectful of that. And she has to be at the airport at 5 in the morning, so we're going to try not to keep her too late, and she's been on the road a lot. So if you will line up over here, and if you would, please be respectful of everybody's time. Let's move her through and take those photos so that everybody gets a chance to take a photo, and I'm sure you can understand that. Thank you, Michelle Malkin, for being here, and thank you all for supporting our program.